Community. Hands down my favorite show, but even I am not blind to the shortcomings. When you think about the worst episode, what usually comes to mind is the so-called puppet episode, Intro to Felt Surrogacy. I've seen several videos that look into why it falls flat, and they all make great points. The biggest one being that there are no stakes involved in the story. The episode doesn't follow the typical story arc, which makes it less engaging. By no means am I trying to argue with anyone, but I think the puppets act as a lightning rod for criticism. It's often the single episode people point to when they say Community Season 4 is such a letdown. But the real warning was right there at the beginning. The first episode, History 101.
Oh, so stupid.
Dan Harmon, the creator of Community, was let go before the 4th season, and Sony brought in 2 new showrunners to fill the position. Although I can't pretend there aren't good episodes in Season 4, many episodes give off the feeling that the show had lost its heart in the shuffle. There was a lot of pressure on the writing and directing teams to prove that they could keep going and produce great content despite such a big change. The credited writer of the episode, Andy Bobrow, said in an interview with Splitsider.com, "The critiques that I'm expecting are, this is a sign of new showrunners trying desperately to assure die-hard fans that we're still going to be the same." In some ways, the beginning of Season 4 feels like the pilot for a new show, when the writers are still trying to figure out who the characters are, how they act, and what relationships will end up paying off later down the road. It's a step back from the end of Season 3. You can tell that the actors are worried too. I'll go over this more later on, but in some scenes it's clear that they just can't put their heart into their lines, while in other places they deliver heroic performances to make the script land. Let me give a quick overview of the episode in case you need a refresher. The A story follows Abed, who's worried about his friends leaving Greendale, and who copes by going to his happy place, which is shown as a fake multicam show in his mind. The B story is the history of ice cream class, with Jeff competing in the Hunger Deans for seats. There are also 2 subplots, one where Shirley and Annie pull pranks together, and one where Troy and Britta make wishes for the school year. In most of what I consider good episodes, there are clearly delineated plots. They do intersect with each other, but it's apparent what the different threads are. This episode blurs those lines much more, so although you could argue about how I define them, this is what we're going with. Before I get into the nitty-gritty, let's take a look at a couple things I like about this episode. Unfortunately, they're not very substantial. Chevy Chase gave a great performance despite not having much screen time. Yvette Nicole Brown's character, Shirley, was one of the more well-written characters in this episode, and she delivered a great performance as well. Annie acting as the dean gave me a good laugh.
Come into my office, turn on the light. Oh my, did my stapler grow legs and move?
I also didn't put this callback together until my 4th rewatch. I watched this episode at least 12 times to make this video.
Dean, what are you... Oh, you smoked the floor of a movie theater.
Yeah, but not for the usual reasons.
But, as Jeff Winger says,
don't ruin it by approving it.
So with that out of the way, let's get into it. Kicking things off easy, why do they have to CGI these balls here? At first I figured they couldn't get them to stay in place, but I mean, just tape them down. The sequence where Troy and Britta are throwing pennies into the fountain. Troy doesn't explain any of the rules and then gets frustrated when Britta doesn't know what they are.
Yeah, but the coins aren't the wishes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
This doesn't add anything to the main stories and feels like something they just added to pad the runtime. The plots all seem to happen in their own individual bubbles. These are the only interactions the Troy-Britta plot has with the main plots.
Don't ask.
Don't tell.
Britta introduced a new rule. No rules.
Cool, we can discuss it.
Next up, flat performances. I was going to point out a couple specific actors, but after more rewatches, I realized that everyone has ups and downs in this episode. You will find some pretty weak performances in the Abed TV sequences, though. It seems like most of them don't like the direction the episode is taking, and it's hard for them to commit to the gimmick. Even outside the fake sitcom scenes, the characters don't act like themselves. It's like the actors are playing characters who are themselves playing another character. Can I just take a second and talk about Abed's sitcom? I hate the laugh track. I hate the multicam setup. I hate the way the characters act. Now listen, I know this is parodying multicam sitcoms. I know it's a trope, but you're supposed to use parodies to make a point. What's the point here? It's possible that I could find one if I watched this episode again, but I just can't force myself to do that. I would literally die. Either way, Community, even as a parody, doesn't work as a multicam. Fun fact though, they did actually film these sequences with a multicam setup. In the DVD commentary, Danny Pudi said it was nice because they didn't have to keep moving the camera to get different angles of a scene. Gut reactions aside, there is a real problem with Abed's imaginary sitcom, and that's that it takes place exclusively in his mind. We've seen how heavily Abed's imagination can influence him in past episodes. Season 2, Episode 7, Abed's heads-up display when he's insulting everyone. Season 2, Episode 11, the Christmas Claymation episode. Season 3, Episode 16, Abed spending lunch with Annie in the Dreamatorium. What's the difference between those episodes and this one? Interaction with the real world. In this episode, there are no stakes for anyone but Abed, while the other 3 examples have a direct impact on other people. There is another episode that takes place exclusively in one person's mind, and that's Season 5, Episode 11, G.I. Jeff. So what makes it any different from History 101? 2 things. The characters behave like themselves, and there are no extraneous subplots. By the start of Season 4, we've seen 70 episodes of Community. We know the characters, we know how they act. In this episode, that information gets thrown away, and like I mentioned earlier, it feels like a regression back to a pilot episode. I hate to say it, but it plays like fan fiction, even though many of the writers from earlier seasons were still working on the show. Here's an example right from the beginning of the episode.
Did you go to your happy place?
Yeah.
Did you envision a babbling brook like I described?
I started out with the Babbling Brook, but then I layered in elements from our world. I'm sure fans of the Babbling Brook will complain, but I felt it was limiting.
Well, it's best to keep it simple.
It was a Babbling Brook.
Okay, here's the deal, Jessica Biel.
After watching the first 3 seasons, you as a viewer have spent about 24 hours with the characters. Maybe you don't understand the characters as well as the writers should, but you can still tell that something's off. On the other hand, Abed would have spent a good portion of 3 years with the characters, and even though he doesn't always understand people, he's shown that he's very perceptive. He knows how people would act, so even if the stilted writing was only present in his happy place, it still wouldn't make sense. Another problem here is that there are just no stakes in this episode. Let's break this down. First off, the group minus Jeff finds out the class is full. This is immediately solved when they find out that Jeff saves them seats. Then the dean comes in and tells them that the class is overbooked, so they have to compete for their spot, which everyone but Jeff decides just isn't worth it. Jeff then admits that he's 1 class away from graduating. All he needs is this history class, and he can get back to his dream of being a lawyer. That single goal is what drives the entire show. Everyone in the study group knows that's what he wants. So when Annie gets mad at him for being close to accomplishing that, it's completely out of character since she's been overwhelmingly supportive in the past. With everyone abandoning the competition, it comes down to
New Jeff!
to win all 7 competitions and secure spots for the entire group. Pretty high stakes, right? Well, no. Jeff really only has to win 1 for himself so he can graduate. If that's the only class he's taking, he'll have no problem finding a time to meet with the study group, if for no other reason than just to hang out. But, just like the writers did, let's ignore that point. As Jeff is competing, we see Abed repeatedly going to his happy place. When the group all gets together, they are clearly worried for him, but tell Jeff to go win the last competition anyway. So what are the stakes for Abed? We don't really know. He's clearly agitated that they'll be graduating, so he pictures them starting over as freshmen. As far as I can figure, the stakes are that the group is worried that he'll withdraw into his imagination. When Jeff sees their concern, he decides to abandon the competition, put his dreams on hold again, and go check if he can help Abed. As he's walking over, Abed imagines a winger speech, which immediately brings him back to reality, and he's suddenly capable of handling the fact that everyone is going to graduate. Jeff didn't say a word, and when everyone was distracted, Leonard steals their balls, which apparently no one has a problem with. So now Jeff has to spend another semester at Greendale, and to cap it all off, no one even cares. Then for the rest of the day off screen, we have to assume Jeff just lives with the fact that he gave up his goal for literally no return. Until he runs into the dean by chance, and suddenly everything's okay, because the school has to offer another history course, or lose grant money. So it turns out that the weak stakes the episode was built around never even existed in the first place. No payoff. Weak characters, diverging plot lines, and no stakes is a combo you just can't beat by counting on your show's existing popularity. In the end, this episode really just stretched itself too thin and couldn't invest the time into developing its stories. Here's another quote from that interview with Andy Bobrow. "If we did it over again, I wouldn't have done a Troy Britta story or a Shirley Annie story. I would have lumped everyone into the Hunger Games and just done those 2 stories. Some version of people competing to get into a class paired with Abed seeing the world differently in multi-camera. I would have just made it 2 stories instead of 5. What was the 5th story?
And the cherry on top of this total lack of sundae.
This episode includes the setup for Changnesia, which... why? Now, to wrap it up, I want to show you this outtake that they actually used in the final version, just by cutting it short. Let me know if you think there's a worse episode that I missed. And now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go recuperate by watching one of my comfort episodes.